Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was chosen as the reincarnation of an ancient Dark Lord. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in the infirmary still smelled of antiseptic and ozone, a sterile scent that failed to mask the phantom stench of blood and scorched concrete that clung to Izuku Midoriya's memory. It had been 3 days since the attack at the unforeseen simulation joint, and while his body was slowly knitting itself back together under Recovery Girl's care, his mind was a frantic storm. He flexed the fingers of his right hand. They moved, a minor miracle he owed to the elderly hero's quirk. The bones had been little more than pulverized gravel. He could still feel the phantom agony, the sickening crunch as he'd thrown everything he had at the Nomu, that monstrous bioengineered puppet designed to kill All Might. He had helped. He had made a difference. All Might had won. But as he lay in the quiet of his room at home, the victory felt hollow, brittle. The gap between himself and his idol wasn't a gap. It was a chasm, a void so vast he felt he could fall into it forever. All Might had fought the Nomu and, while pushed to his limit, had walked away. Izuku had thrown a single, desperate punch and had shattered his own body in the process. This wasn't sustainable. He couldn't be a hero who broke after every fight. He couldn't be a liability. The thought was a physical weight in his chest. "Izuku, honey? Are you sure you should be up?" His mother's voice, laced with a familiar, trembling anxiety, pulled him from his thoughts. He looked up from his notebook, Hero Analysis for the Future, No. 13. Where he had been furiously scribbling, not about other heroes, but about himself. Pages were filled with diagrams of his own limbs, frantic calculations of force distribution, and desperate theories on how to mitigate the catastrophic recoil of One for All. "I'm fine, Mom," he said, forcing a smile that felt thin and unnatural. "Just thinking. I need to get stronger." Inko Midoriya wrung her hands, her eyes welling with the tears that were always just beneath the surface. "But you were so brave!" "The teacher said so." "All Might, he said you were incredible." "You need to rest, Izuku. Please." He loved his mother more than anything, but she couldn't understand. She saw his dream as a dangerous precipice he was determined to dance upon. She didn't see the sacred duty he'd been entrusted with, the burning legacy that now coursed through his veins like lightning in a bottle. Rest felt like failure. Stagnation felt like a betrayal. Over the next week, as Uehai tentatively resumed classes, a new kind of obsession took hold of Izuku. He filled every spare moment with relentless training. Before school, he ran until his lungs burned and his legs screamed for mercy. After school, he claimed one of the smaller, more secluded training grounds, Ground Gamma with its labyrinth of industrial piping, and pushed One for All to its absolute limit. He replayed All Might's words in his head over and over. "Clench your butt cheeks and yell this from the bottom of your heart. Smash!" It had been a crude, almost comical piece of advice, but the core principle was sound. Visualize the power not as a singular explosion, but as a current flowing through his entire body. The egg in the microwave. Don't let it explode, he tried. He stood amidst a maze of steel, closed his eyes, and focused. He pictured the crackling, incandescent energy of One for All. He imagined it flowing from the core of his being, down his legs, up his spine, into his arms. He tried to draw just a sliver, a single percentage point of its infinite power. The first attempts were disastrous. A flicker of green lightning would erupt, and a jolt like a cattle prod would send him stumbling. Once, he tried to channel it into his leg for a kick and nearly dislocated his hip, the power surging uncontrollably for a split second. But he was learning. Slowly, painstakingly, he began to feel the faintest hum of control. He could activate it for a moment, a surge of warmth and strength that didn't immediately threaten to tear him apart. It was progress. It wasn't enough. It was during one of these grueling, self-imposed sessions that it happened. The sun was setting, casting long, distorted shadows that writhed between the pipes and gantries of Ground Gamma. He was drenched in sweat, his muscles trembling with exhaustion. His last attempt to hold a 5% current for a full minute had ended with him on his knees, his right arm screaming with a familiar, deep ache. Just one more time, he told himself, his voice a ragged gasp. I can do it. I have to. He pushed himself to his feet, his vision swimming. He planted his stance, took a deep breath, and reached inside himself for that wellspring of power. He pulled. Not 5%. He aimed for 7, a reckless gamble born of frustration. The power didn't just answer, it roared. It was too much. The green lightning that usually danced around him became a blinding torrent. The hum became a shriek. It wasn't a current, it was a flood. Pain, white-hot and absolute, erupted from every cell in his body. His muscles seized, his bones groaned under a pressure they were never meant to withstand. His vision dissolved into a field of white static, the world reduced to a singular, deafening roar of power and agony. He was breaking. He was breaking everywhere, all at once. He collapsed, his body little more than a puppet with its strings cut. And in that silent, terrifying space between consciousness and oblivion, as the static in his mind began to recede, he heard it. It wasn't a sound that came through his ears. It was a thought, an impression, that bloomed fully formed in the center of his skull. It was a voice, but it had no tone, no pitch. It was defined only by its profound, ancient coldness and an abyss of condescension. Such a fragile vessel. The voice felt like ice water dripped directly onto his brain. He twitched, a reflexive shudder against the mental intrusion. You wield borrowed power so clumsily. The words were not accusatory. They were a simple, damning statement of fact, delivered with the weary disinterest of a master craftsman observing a child fumbling with his priceless tools. The sheer arrogance of it was a shock, more jarring than the pain that still throbbed in his limbs. Then nothing. The voice was gone, leaving behind only a lingering chill and the echo of its contempt. Izuku's consciousness slammed back into his body. He opened his eyes, gasping for air that felt thick as mud. He was lying on the cold concrete, his body a map of pain. But he wasn't broken. Miraculously, nothing had snapped this time. The power had receded just as quickly as it had surged. He pushed himself up, his arms trembling violently. He looked around the empty training ground. The long shadows of dusk had deepened into near darkness. He was alone. Hello? He called out, his voice weak. Only the wind whistling through the pipes answered. It was a hallucination. It had to be. A product of pain and exhaustion. His brain, starved of oxygen and overloaded with sensory input, had simply short-circuited and produced a phantom voice. It was the only logical explanation. He clung to that logic like a drowning man to a piece of driftwood as he staggered back towards the dorms, the cold words chasing him all the way. 2 days later, Aizawa-sensei announced a revised combat training exercise. The USJ incident highlighted a number of deficiencies, he said, his voice a monotone drone that still commanded absolute attention. Your ability to work in teams was one. Your ability to adapt in one-on-one combat was another. We'll be addressing the latter today. The class buzzed with a nervous energy. They were in Gym Gamma, Aizawa standing before them with his usual tired expression. You'll be paired up. The goal is not to win, but to demonstrate control and tactical thinking. You are not to cause serious injury. Recovery Girl has enough to deal with. His eyes seemed to linger on Izuku for a fraction of a second. First pair. Bakugo. Midoriya. A collective intake of breath swept through the students. Izuku's blood ran cold. He looked over at Katsuki Bakugo, who was already grinning, a wide, predatory slash across his face. It wasn't a happy grin. It was the expression of a wolf that had just cornered its favorite prey. Finally, Bakugo growled, cracking his knuckles. A chance to knock some sense into you, you damned Deku. Let's see what that borrowed quirk of yours can really do. Izuku swallowed hard. Sparring with Kaken was always a trial by fire. Since the USJ, an unspoken tension had crackled between them. Bakugo had seen him act, seen him fight, and the old dynamic of the powerful and the powerless was irrevocably broken. Now Bakugo seemed driven by a furious need to re-establish his dominance, to prove that whatever power Izuku had stumbled into, it was nothing compared to his own innate genius. They stood opposite each other in the center of the vast training hall. Aizawa gave a curt nod. Begin. Bakugo didn't hesitate. He shot forward, propelled by a series of controlled explosions from his palms, his movements a blur of orange and black. "You've been getting cocky, Deku!" he roared, swinging a right hook that was less a punch and more a targeted detonation. Izuku's mind raced. He activated One for All, full cowling at 3%. The familiar green energy coursed through him, a low, manageable hum. He was faster now, more agile. He ducked under the explosive punch, the heat of it scorching the air beside his face, and scrambled back. Analyze. Predict. Survive, he thought, his mantra in any fight with Kaken. "Still running away, huh?" Bakugo snarled, using his explosions to pivot in midair, launching a blistering volley of smaller, faster blasts. His AP shot. Izuku dodged and weaved, the concrete at his heels erupting in small craters. He was on the defensive, completely. He was too afraid to use his power offensively, too terrified of the consequences. A 3% punch wouldn't even faze Kaken, but a 10% one might break his own arm and seriously injure his opponent. The balance was impossible. "Fight me, you coward!" Bakugo screamed, his frustration mounting. The voice from the training ground whispered in the back of his mind unbidden. His rage makes him predictable. A flaw to be exploited. Izuku flinched, shaking his head as if to dislodge the thought. It wasn't his own. His own thoughts were a frantic chorus of "Oh my God, I am going to die." This was different. Colder. Sharper. He ignored it. He had to focus. He saw an opening. Bakugo was overextending after a wide swing. Now, he channeled 5% into his legs and lunged, not to attack, but to get behind him, to try and snag him with Aizawa's capture weapon he'd been practicing with. But Bakugo was faster. He'd anticipated it. He spun on his heel, his left palm glowing with ferocious intensity. "Stun grenade!" A blinding flash of light erupted from his hand. Izuku cried out, throwing his arms up to shield his eyes. His vision vanished, replaced by searing white spots. His ears rang. He was blind and disoriented. He was a perfect target. "Game over, Deku!" He heard Bakugo yell, the sound muffled by the ringing in his ears. Through the dancing spots in his vision, he could just make out Bakugo's silhouette. He was airborne, rotating, his right arm pulled back, the gauntlet on it already smoking. This was it. A full-power, close-range explosion. It wouldn't kill him, but it would put him in the infirmary for a week. Aizawa would stop it, surely, but maybe not in time. Panic, stark and absolute, seized him. His body was screaming to move, to run, but his disoriented senses wouldn't obey. There was no time. No escape. Orphe felt distant, a complex engine he didn't have time to start. Useless, he thought, a wave of self-loathing washing over him. And then, the other voice answered, not with words, but with an impulse. A command. Pathetic. "If you will not act, I will." It happened outside the realm of conscious thought. As the incandescent orange energy of Bakugo's explosion barreled towards him, a sliver of Izuku's own shadow on the floor, a dark patch of concrete obscured by his body, seemed to deepen. It turned from a simple absence of light into a patch of pure, liquid void. From this void, a tendril of absolute blackness erupted. It was thin, no thicker than a whip, and moved with an unnatural, silent speed. It wasn't solid, yet it had substance. It looked like a tear in the fabric of the world itself. It shot out and met Bakugo's explosion head-on. There was no sound of impact, no clang or thud. There was only a strange, wet hiss, like hot metal being plunged into oil. The shadow tendril wrapped around the core of the explosion, and for a split second, it seemed to consume the light and heat. The blast was violently deflected, not dissipated. It careened sideways, slamming into the far wall of the gym with a deafening boom that shook the entire building and left a massive, scorched crater in the reinforced concrete. The tendril retracted as quickly as it had appeared, melting back into Izuku's shadow, which immediately returned to normal. The entire event had lasted less than a second. Silence. The ringing in Izuku's ears faded, replaced by the sound of his own ragged breathing. His vision cleared. He was standing untouched. 20 feet to his left, the wall was a smoking ruin. Bakugo was hanging in the air, his eyes wide with utter, unadulterated shock, his trajectory completely thrown off. He landed clumsily, stumbling to a halt. He stared at the demolished wall. Then he stared at his own hands. Then his gaze, burning with a confused fury, locked onto Izuku. What? Bakugo breathed, his voice dangerously low. The hell was that? Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He looked down at his own shadow. It was just a shadow. Normal. Harmless. But he had felt it. A deep, soul-crushing cold had emanated from his core, a feeling of ancient power flexing its muscles for the first time in millennia. He hadn't controlled it. He hadn't even willed it. It had just happened. I don't know. He stammered, the words tasting like ash. My quirk! It must be a new part of my quirk! It was a feeble lie, and they both knew it. One for all was green lightning and overwhelming physical power. This had been something else entirely. Something dark, subtle, and alien. Don't you lie to me! Bakugo roared, stalking forward, his palms beginning to pop and crackle again. That wasn't your power! That was sneaky! What are you hiding, you damn nerd? Enough! Aizawa's voice cut through the tension like a knife. His eyes were narrowed, glowing a faint red as he activated his quirk, his capture weapon writhing around his shoulders. He wasn't looking at Bakugo. He was staring directly at Izuku, his gaze analytical and deeply unsettling. He had seen it. Of course, he'd seen it. There was no hiding something like that from a pro like Eraserhead. The match is over, Aizawa declared, his tone leaving no room for argument. Bakugo, you used excessive force. Midoriya, we need to talk. After class, the rest of the day passed in a blur of anxiety. Izuku couldn't focus on any of his lessons. He could feel the stares of his classmates, hear their whispers. He could feel Kaken's furious glare burning a hole in the back of his head. But worst of all was the memory of that cold, alien power and the voice that now felt like a permanent fixture in the back of his mind, a silent, mocking observer. He tried to rationalize it again, scribbling frantically in his notebook during a break. Hypothesis: a secondary, latent quirk awakened by the stress of the USJ and the surge of One for All? Possible, but statistically improbable. Quirk singularity theories suggest. The writing was a desperate attempt to impose order on something that felt fundamentally chaotic. The voice, the shadow, they didn't feel like a quirk. Quirks were a part of you, a biological function. This felt like an infestation. That night, sleep did not come easily. When it finally did, it offered no respite. It dragged him into a world of ash and iron. He was not Izuku Midoriya. He was standing on a balcony of black, volcanic rock, overlooking a city that stretched to the horizon. There were no lights, no gleaming towers of glass and steel. The buildings were monolithic, brutalist structures of dark stone and iron, built for permanence and intimidation. The sky was not blue, but a bruised, perpetual twilight, choked with the smoke that rose from countless forges and refineries. He looked down at his hands. They were not the scarred, boyish hands of a teenager. They were encased in gauntlets of black, ornate metal, etched with glowing crimson lines that pulsed like embers. His body felt immense, powerful, a fortress of muscle and bone clad in heavy plate armor. A heavy cloak, the color of dried blood, rested on his shoulders. He felt no anxiety. No fear. No doubt. There was only a profound, unshakable certainty. A sense of absolute command. He was the center of this world. It revolved around him. Below, in the main causeway, legions of soldiers marched. Their armor was uniform, their faces hidden behind emotionless iron masks. They carried pikes and heavy tower shields, and their banners, held aloft on grim standards, depicted a shattered sun on a field of black. They were his. Their loyalty was not earned, it was a fact of existence, as immutable as the stone beneath his feet. He could feel the power thrumming within him. It was not the borrowed, chaotic energy of One for All. This was his own. It was a dark, cool, and endless ocean of force, responding to his every whim. He held up a gauntlet hand, and the shadows in the courtyard below twisted and writhed, coalescing into monstrous, canine shapes that prowled between the ranks of soldiers. This power was as natural to him as breathing. A figure approached from behind, kneeling. "My lord," a voice, raspy and subservient, said. The Western Rebellion has been crushed. The last of their magi are in the dungeons, awaiting your judgment. He turned. He didn't see the speaker's face. He only felt a wave of cold satisfaction. Order had been restored. Chaos had been punished. It was the way of things. The only way. Heroes and villains, freedom and tyranny, these were the pointless squabbles of children. There was only one truth, order, imposed by an unbreakable will. His will. He looked back out at his smoke-shrouded empire, at the disciplined march of his legions, at the world he had bent to his will. He felt no joy, no pride. Only the quiet, grim contentment of a job well done. This was peace. This was stability. It had been purchased with fire and blood, but it was a peace that would last for 1,000 years. The dream shifted. He was on a throne now, carved from a single, colossal piece of obsidian that seemed to drink the very light from the air. Before him, a line of chained figures knelt, the rebel magi. They were defiant, spitting curses, their eyes filled with impotent rage. He felt a flicker of something, not anger, but a tired annoyance. They had chosen chaos. They had chosen poorly. He lifted a single finger, and the shadows in the throne room converged on the prisoners. They didn't scream for long. Their life force was drawn from them, siphoned away like water from a sponge, feeding the cool, dark ocean of his own power. It was not cruel. It was efficient. It was necessary. The world began to fade, the throne room dissolving into static. But the feeling remained, the absolute power, the chilling pragmatism, the crushing weight of a crown forged from fear and iron, and through the static, a name surfaced. Not a name he was called, but a name that was him. A name that was a symbol, a title, a truth. Izuku woke with a strangled cry, sitting bolt upright in his all-might-themed bed. He was drenched in cold sweat, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The cheerful, primary colors of his room felt garish and mocking after the grim monochromes of the dream. He clutched his head, trying to shake the last vestiges of the nightmare. But it wasn't like a normal dream. The memories were crystal clear, the sensations terrifyingly real. He could still feel the phantom weight of the armor, the cold thrum of dark power in his veins. He could still feel the cold satisfaction of executing those prisoners. He felt sick. He scrambled out of bed and stumbled to his desk, fumbling for the light. He needed to ground himself, to see his own face, to remember who he was. He stared at his reflection in the dark screen of his monitor. It was his face, round, freckled, his green hair an untamable mess. But for a horrifying, gut-wrenching moment, he saw another pair of eyes superimposed over his own. They were ancient, weary, and filled with a chilling, bottomless contempt. The room was silent. Utterly, deathly silent. But the silence was different now. It was heavy, expectant, as if the entire world was holding its breath. And in that silence, the voice from the training ground returned. It was no longer a whisper in the static. It was clearer now, a thought placed directly into the forefront of his mind, imbued with a possessive, undeniable finality. It wasn't a memory from the dream. It was a formal introduction. Malachar. The name hung in the airless room, an alien sound that tasted of ash and empire. It was the name of the conqueror. The king. The shadow-wielding tyrant from his nightmares. Izuku stared at his own terrified reflection, and he knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that this was not a hallucination. It was not a side effect. It was not a dream. It was a memory, and the man named Malachar was not just in his head. In some deep, fundamental way he could not begin to comprehend, that man was him. The days between the USJ attack and the UE Sports Festival were a crucible of quiet terror for Izuku Midoriya. The entity in his head, the ancient, arrogant conqueror who called himself Malachar, had fallen silent after that first, terrifying night. Yet, his presence was a constant, oppressive weight in the back of Izuku's mind. It was like living with the knowledge of a bomb in his own chest, not knowing what might trigger its detonation. He tried to rationalize it, to bury it under heaps of logic. A stress-induced dissociative episode. A phantom personality created by the trauma of the USJ and the sudden manifestation of a complex quirk. He wrote pages of these theories in a new, secret notebook, one he kept hidden even from his mother. But no amount of scientific reasoning could explain away the chilling clarity of the nightmares that now claimed him every night. He walked the cold stone halls of a black fortress, issued orders to faceless legions, and wielded a power over shadow that felt more natural than his own limbs. He woke each morning with the phantom taste of ash and iron in his mouth and a terrifying sense of homesickness for a place he'd never been. This internal war began to bleed into his preparations for the festival. His analysis, once a source of heroic inspiration, took on a darker, more clinical edge. He still filled the pages of hero analysis for the future, number 13, but the notes were different. He sat in class, seemingly listening to present mic, but his eyes would be on his classmates, his pen scratching furiously. Ida Tenya. Quirk engine. Top speed exceptional, but turning radius at full burst is predictable. Susceptible to low, sweeping attacks aimed at his legs, his rigid adherence to rules can be exploited. Create a scenario where the correct action is the strategically disadvantageous one. He will choose it every time. Tokoyami Fumikage. Quirk, dark shadow. Power is inversely proportional to ambient light. A powerful symbiotic fighter. But the link is also a weakness. Dark shadow manifests emotions Tokoyami represses. Inflict psychological stress, panic, fear, and dark shadow's control will fray. A flashbang grenade would be devastating. His own power could become his biggest liability. Uraraka Ochako. Quirk, zero gravity. Requires physical contact with all 5 fingers. Her close-quarters combat skills are improving, but her primary instinct is to touch, not strike. Bait her into overextending, then counter. Psychological note, deep-seated financial insecurity drives her. Frame of victory as being purely for monetary gain, and her focus may waver, creating an opening. He would stare at his own neat handwriting, at the cold, brutal assessments, and a wave of nausea would roll through him. These weren't the thoughts of a hero. They were the thoughts of a predator cataloging the weaknesses of its prey. He could almost hear Malaker's dry, unimpressed commentary layered over his own analysis, a shard of obsidian in his thoughts. Sentiment is a flaw. Attachment is a vulnerability. Learn this, child, or this world will teach you through pain. He tried to fight it, to focus on the heroic aspects, but Malaker's influence was like a subtle poison, seeping into his worldview. It made him sharper, faster, more observant. It also made him colder. When the day of the sports festival arrived, the roar of the crowd was a physical force, a wave of sound that washed over the waiting students. Izuku stood in the prep room, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. This was it. A chance to show the world, to show All Might, that he was here. Midoriya. He turned to see Todoroki Shoto standing a few feet away, his expression an impassive mask, his mismatched eyes holding a chilling intensity. Todoroki declared his intent, his personal war against his father, and by extension, against Izuku as All Might's apparent protege. Izuku felt the familiar surge of nervous energy, but beneath it, something else stirred. A cold, analytical calm settled over him. He met Todoroki's gaze, and for a moment, he wasn't just looking at a rival. He was assessing a threat. He uses his ice. He rejects his fire. A self-imposed limitation, the cold voice in his head observed. He fights a war on 2 fronts, one against you, and one against himself. A fool's errand. His internal conflict is his greatest weakness. Izuku shook his head, pushing the thought away. He had to focus on being a hero. On doing his best. The first event, the obstacle race, was chaos. As Todoroki froze a huge swathe of the track, Izuku, instead of being caught off guard, felt a flicker of grim admiration. It was a decisive, powerful move that neutralized dozens of competitors at once. Efficient. Ruthless. Malaker was unimpressed. A brute force tactic. He expends enormous energy for a momentary advantage, and creates a path for his most capable rivals to follow. Amateurish. Izuku ignored the voice, his own analytical mind, now supercharged, taking over. He saw what Malaker saw. He used the frozen path Todoroki had made, but as the giant robots from the entrance exam appeared, he didn't freeze in terror. He watched as Todoroki brought one down with a massive glacier, again, a display of overwhelming power. Izuku noticed immediately that the move had left the machine unstable, precariously balanced. He didn't have the power to destroy them, but he didn't need to. He ran through the legs of the teetering behemoth, using the chaos as a shield. At the final minefield, his moment of genius felt less like his own and more like a whispered suggestion from the darkness within him. As he dug up the mines, the idea to use their force not as a hazard but as a propulsion system felt alien, brutally pragmatic. It was a solution born of pure, cold logic, divorced from the panic of the situation. He blasted across the finish line in first place, the crowd roaring, his mind eerily silent and clear. He had won the first round, not through overwhelming power, but through cunning and exploitation. It left a bitter taste in his mouth. The cavalry battle was an even greater test. He was the target, the 10 million point prize. As students backed away from him, he felt the familiar sting of isolation, but this time, it was paired with a cold, strategic awareness. Fear is a tool. Their hesitation gives you time to choose your allies, not be chosen by them. He formed his team with Uraraka, Tokoemi, and the surprise addition of Mei Hatsum. Malakir seethed at the idea of relying on others. Their weaknesses are now your own. Their fate is tied to yours. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and you have willingly shackled yourself to 3 of them. Despite the internal critique, Izuku's leadership was uncannily effective. He directed his team with a precision that startled them. Uraraka-san, keep us airborne in short, unpredictable bursts. Don't give them a stable target. Hatsum-san, use your gadgets for misdirection. Smoke screens, flashes. I don't need you to invent a weapon, I need you to invent chaos. Tokoemi-kun, Dark Shadow is our primary weapon and defense. Don't just attack. Use it to create a perimeter. A wall of shadow. Make them fear getting close. He saw the battlefield not as a chaotic mess of teenagers, but as a chessboard. He anticipated Todoroki's flanking maneuver, ordering Uraraka to activate her quirk just as the ice rushed towards them, lifting them over the attack. He saw Bakugo's aerial assault coming and had Tokoemi use Dark Shadow to intercept him, not to injure, but to obscure his vision and throw off his trajectory. His commands were rapid-fire, precise, and unerringly correct. In the final, frantic seconds, as Todoroki's team made their last, desperate charge, Izuku didn't panic. He saw the opening Ida's recipro burst created, saw Todoroki's hand reaching for his headband. He couldn't stop it. But he could anticipate it. As Todoroki snatched the 10 million point prize, Izuku, in the same motion, had already directed Tokoemi to grab one of the lower point headbands from Todoroki's neck. It was a calculated loss, a strategic sacrifice to ensure they still qualified. They ended in 4th place. His teammates were celebrating their survival, but Izuku felt a strange disconnect. He hadn't felt like a teammate. He'd felt like a general, moving his pieces across a map. It was in the stands high above the arena that the observers began to voice their concerns. There's something different about young Midoriya, All Might said, his voice a low rumble meant only for Aizawa, who stood beside him. He was in his skeletal form, a hand pressed to his scarred chest. It's not just his control of one for all. There's a coldness to his strategy. A precision I've never seen in him. Aizawa nodded, his dark eyes narrowed, missing nothing. I noticed it in the cavalry battle. His commands were flawless. He wasn't reacting to threats, he was predicting them, and his movements, they lacked the hesitation of a novice. The way he adjusts his footing, the way he aims his counterattacks, even when he's just dodging, it's economical. Efficient. Almost cruel. He paused, his gaze fixed on the small green-haired figure on the field below. It's the muscle memory of a veteran soldier, not a first-year hero student. I don't understand it. All Might felt a chill that had nothing to do with the afternoon breeze. He could feel one for all within him, a warm, familiar ember. But when he focused on Izuku, he could sense a distortion around the sacred torch he had passed on. It was like a patch of shadowy static, a flicker of something alien clinging to the pure light of the quirk, something dark, possessive, and impossibly old. The final round. One-on-one battles. His opponent was Todoroki. As he walked into the tunnel leading to the arena, the roar of the crowd was a distant, muffled thing. The only sound that was clear was the cold voice in his head, a constant, condescending whisper. This boy is a weapon broken by his creator. He believes his pain makes him unique. It only makes him predictable. Shut up! Izuku whispered to himself, clenching his fists. You wish to save him, Malachar mused, the thought dripping with contempt. A noble, idiotic sentiment. The only way to save a rabid dog is to put it down. Break him. Crush his spirit. Make him understand that his half-measures are an insult to true power. That is the only victory that matters. I'm going to help him, Izuku said, his voice trembling slightly. And I'm going to win my own way. He stepped into the blinding light of the arena. Across the vast concrete stage, Todoroki waited, his expression locked in a cold fury. The battle began. Todoroki's opening move was the same one he'd used in the obstacle race. A massive, tidal wave of ice, jagged and brutal, designed to end the fight in an instant. Izuku's response was pure instinct, honed by Malachar's silent influence. He didn't try to punch through the center. That was what Todoroki expected. Instead, he channeled one for all into a single finger, a Delaware smash. But he didn't aim it at the wave. He aimed it at the ground just in front of him. The resulting shockwave shattered the concrete, creating a cloud of dust and debris that momentarily obscured Todoroki's vision, while the concussive force blew a massive hole in the structurally weakest part of the ice wave, its base. The glacier crumbled, its own weight bringing it down. Crude but effective, Malachar conceded. You are learning to think, not just to break. Todoroki sent another wave, and another. Each time, Izuku met it with a flick of his finger, shattering his own bones, but also shattering the attack. The pain was excruciating, a familiar, blinding agony. He could feel the bones in his right hand grinding together, but he gritted his teeth and pushed through. He's fighting you with only his right hand, Izuku yelled across the distance, his voice strained. He's not even using his full power. Everyone else is fighting with everything they've got, to win and get to the top. You want to win with just half your strength? You haven't put a single scratch on me, you know. His words were for Todoroki, but they were also for himself, a desperate mantra against the chilling whispers in his own soul. He is toying with you, and you are destroying yourself for nothing, Malachar said calmly, as another finger broke with a wet, sickening snap. This self-mutilation is not heroic. It is pathetic. Strike his body, not his eyes. He is unprotected. End it. Ignoring the voice, Izuku charged. He had to get close. He had to make Todoroki understand. He dodged a pillar of ice and felt a freezing graze along his leg, his movements becoming sluggish. Todoroki was encasing his own right side in frost. He is slowing. The overuse of his ice is lowering his own body temperature, Malachar observed, his voice like a scalpel dissecting their opponent. He is reaching his limit. A fatal design flaw. Press the attack. He will shatter before you do. Izuku saw it too. The frost creeping up Todoroki's uniform, the slight tremor in his movements. He was at his limit. Izuku charged again, his left hand, his last good hand, now mangled and purple. He had one shot left. One finger. As he ran, Todoroki trapped his foot in ice. He was stuck. A wall of jagged ice spikes erupted from the ground, racing towards him. It was over. No. Driven by a desperate, self-destructive resolve, Izuku channeled one for all not just into his already broken finger, but through his entire shattered arm, unleashing a blast of wind pressure that was an order of magnitude greater than before. The ice wall exploded into 1,000 glittering shards. But the attack had cost him. His entire left arm was now a mangled, useless ruin. He stood before Todoroki, broken, bleeding, but his eyes burned with a feverish intensity. "It's your power!" he screamed, the words raw, torn from the very depths of his soul. "It's your quirk, not his!" Todoroki's eyes widened. And for the first time, something other than ice erupted from him. A spontaneous, uncontrollable explosion of fire burst from his left side, melting the glacier that filled the stadium, washing over the arena in a wave of incandescent heat. The crowd roared. Endeavor screamed in triumph, and Malachar, for the first time, was silent. In the face of that raw, elemental power, that untamed inferno, The ancient lord in Izuku's mind seemed to pause. When he spoke again, the condescension was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like interest. So, he was hiding a star within him. Good. Now the battle truly begins. Show him that your borrowed light is nothing compared to my inherited darkness. But Izuku wasn't listening. He had gotten through. He had saved him. Now, he just had to survive. Todoroki, reeling from the sudden surge of his own power, unleashed everything. A torrent of flame, a blizzard of ice. It all rushed towards Izuku. Izuku met it head-on, pouring every last ounce of one for all he could muster into his ruined right arm, his legs, his entire body. The two forces met in the center of the stadium. The resulting explosion was cataclysmic. A whirlwind of fire and ice and raw power that blew out the stadium lights and shook the very foundations of the building. Cementos and Midnight tried to intervene, but they were too late. The shockwave blasted them both back. When the dust settled, Izuku was slumped against the remains of a concrete wall, his body broken beyond belief, barely conscious. Todoroki was standing on the other side of the crater, his left side smoking, out of bounds. Izuku had won. The world returned in blurry, painful flashes. The white ceiling of the infirmary. The sharp smell of disinfectant. The gentle, chiding voice of recovery girl. Out of control. If you keep using your power like this, young man, there won't be anything left of you for me to heal. She was saying. Her quirk was a warm, pulling sensation, slowly stitching his pulverized bones and torn muscles back together. The process was exhausting, draining his stamina until he felt like an empty husk. He lay on the cot, his body aching with a profound weariness. The fight was a blur of pain and shouting, but the outcome was clear. He had helped Todoroki. He had shown All Might he was worthy, but the cost. He looked at his newly healed hands, which still throbbed with phantom agony. They were already starting to scar. The voice of Malachor was quiet, a distant, resentful presence. He had been denied the victory he'd craved, the absolute domination of an opponent. Izuku's self-sacrificial win was, in his eyes, a pathetic defeat. As recovery girl bustled away to check on another student, Izuku slowly pushed himself into a sitting position. His head swam. He felt hollowed out, physically and spiritually. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only confusion and a deep, gnawing anxiety about the presence that shared his soul. Was it getting stronger? Was he losing control? He glanced to his right, at a polished metal tray of medical instruments resting on a small table. His reflection was distorted in the curved steel, a warped, funhouse version of himself. He stared at his own face, at his wide green eyes still wet with the tears of exertion and pain. For a split second, the reflection flickered. His own face was gone. Staring back at him from the polished metal was a man he knew only from nightmares. The face was angular and severe, framed by dark hair streaked with gray at the temples. The skin was pale, as if it had not seen the sun in a century. But it was the eyes that seized him, that paralyzed him with a cold more absolute than any of Todoroki's eyes. They were not Izuku's wide, expressive emerald eyes. They were the color of ancient, weathered iron, pupils like pinpricks in an endless void. They held no warmth, no kindness, no fear. They held only the crushing weight of millennia, the weariness of 1,000 wars, and an abyss of profound, unshakable contempt for the weak, sniveling boy whose body he now inhabited. Izuku's breath hitched in his throat. His heart stopped. The eyes in the reflection narrowed, not in anger, but in a look of cold, calculating assessment. It was the gaze of a predator that had finally decided to stop observing and start hunting. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. His own terrified, freckled face stared back at him from the tray. He blinked, and there was no trace of the other man. But the image was burned into his mind. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination. He had looked into a mirror and seen the soul of Malachor staring back. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the marrow of his newly mended bones, that the whispers were just the beginning. The victory at the sports festival was a hollow, echoing thing. Izuku Midoriya was a name on the nation's lips, the boy who had broken himself to win, the one who had unlocked the fiery heart of Endeavor's son. He received pats on the back, odd looks from his classmates, and a brief, intensely proud smile from All Might. But inside, a blizzard was raging. The reflection in the polished metal tray haunted his waking moments. The iron-gray eyes, the ancient contempt. It was a more vivid memory than the roar of the crowd or the feeling of victory. It was a brand on his soul. And the name Malachar was a constant, silent hum in the back of his mind, a bass note beneath the melody of his own thoughts. He was losing himself. This strange, cold pragmatism that had guided him through the festival, the predatory gaze with which he now assessed his friend's weaknesses, it wasn't him. It was an invasive species of thought, and it was taking root. Desperate for answers, he sought out All Might. "The vestiges you mentioned, All Might," Izuku began, finding his mentor in one of the UA faculty lounges, his voice barely a whisper. "The ones inside One for All. How do I talk to them?" All Might, in his skeletal form, paused from sipping his tea. He looked at Izuku, his deep-set eyes full of concern. He saw the dark circles under the boy's own, the frantic energy that seemed to vibrate just beneath his skin. "That is a difficult question, my boy," he said slowly. "It is not a conscious process. For me, they were faint echoes. A feeling. A brief vision in a dream. It took a near-death experience for me to see them clearly. It is not something one can simply do." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "Young Midoriya, what's wrong? You seem troubled. More than just the strain of the festival." Izuku opened his mouth to tell him everything. About the voice, the shadow tendril, the nightmares of an obsidian throne, the reflection that was not his own. But the words died in his throat. How could he tell the symbol of peace that his chosen successor was possibly the reincarnation of an ancient, evil king, that a dark power, antithetical to everything One for All stood for, was nesting in his soul? All Might had already given him so much, had already sacrificed everything. To burden him with this, it felt like the ultimate betrayal, so he lied. "I am just trying to understand One for All better," he said, forcing a bright, wobbly smile. "I want to be the best successor I can be, and I thought maybe they could help me control it." The lie tasted like poison, but All Might seemed to accept it, his expression softening into one of pride. "Your dedication is commendable, my boy. The answer, I believe, lies in clearing your mind. Find your center. Meditate. The power responds to the will. Perhaps if your will is calm and focused, you can hear its heart. Meditate." The advice seemed so simple, yet for Izuku, whose mind was a perpetual hurricane of analysis and anxiety, it felt like being told to climb a waterfall. But he had to try. It was the only lead he had. If he could just reach the previous users of One for All, maybe they would have an answer. Maybe they could tell him what this dark infestation was, and how to get rid of it. That night, he sat cross-legged on the floor of his All Might-themed bedroom. The cheerful posters and action figures that had been his lifelong comfort now seemed to mock him. They were symbols of a simple, pure heroism he felt was slipping through his fingers. He closed his eyes. "Clear your mind," he whispered to himself, mimicking All Might's advice. He focused on his breathing, the rise and fall of his chest. Inhale, exhale. His mind did not clear. It flooded. Kaken's explosive fury. Todoroki's wall of ice. Uraraka's determined face, the feeling of his bones snapping, over and over. He pushed the thoughts away, trying to focus on the power within him. He reached for the familiar, warm spark of One for All. He pictured it as a sun in his core, a nexus of heroic energy, passed down through generations. He felt a flicker of it, a comforting warmth that spread through his chest. This was it. This was the connection. He pushed deeper, trying to follow that thread of warmth to its source, to the community of souls he knew were waiting there. "Nana Shimura, the others, please, help me." The warmth wavered. A sudden, profound cold began to seep in from the edges of his consciousness. It was a chilling, absolute cold that had nothing to do with temperature. It was the cold of a starless void, of a tomb sealed for millennia. The comforting sun of One for All flickered violently, like a candle in a gale. The cold was snuffing it out. Panic seized him. He tried to pull back, to open his eyes and return to the safety of his bedroom, but he was no longer in control. A force, immense and ancient, had taken notice of his mental probing. It was like a leviathan of the deep, disturbed from its slumber by the fumbling of a child. It wrapped ethereal tendrils around his consciousness and pulled. The world did not fade. It shattered. The feeling of his bedroom floor, the scent of the air, the sound of his own breathing, it all dissolved into screeching static. He was falling, tumbling through a black, soundless abyss. The warmth of one for all was gone, a distant, dying star. There was only the crushing pressure of the void and the iron-hard grip on his soul, dragging him down, down, down into the dark. His descent stopped with a jolt that rattled his very essence. The static cleared. He was standing. He was no longer in his room. He was no longer in his own body, but a projection of his consciousness, clad in his simple home clothes. He stood on a floor of polished black stone that seemed to drink the very concept of light, reflecting nothing. The air was thin, cold, and utterly still. There was no sound. No wind. No life. The silence was a physical presence, pressing in on him from all sides. He looked up. There was no ceiling. Only a swirling, endless expanse of blackness, a cosmic abyss devoid of stars, suns, or moons. It was the sky from his nightmares. He was in the heart of the shadow. He stood in a throne room of impossible scale. Vast, unadorned pillars of the same light-devouring stone rose up into the infinite darkness, so far apart that they seemed to be marking the edges of the world itself. The architecture was brutal and monolithic, speaking of power, not beauty, of permanence, not comfort. And there, at the far end of the cavernous space, upon a raised dais of jagged, obsidian-like steps, was the throne. It was the throne from his dream, but to see it now, even as a projection, was to understand true dread. It was carved from a single piece of stone so black it seemed like a hole in reality. It was not decorated with jewels or gold, but with grim, intricate carvings that writhed and shifted in the corner of his eye. He could make out scenes of conquest, of cities burning, of armies kneeling before a single, commanding figure. It was a monument to absolute, unyielding dominion, and there was someone sitting on it, a silhouette at first. A figure clad in dark, heavy armor that seemed forged from the same midnight stone as the hall itself. A cloak the color of dried blood was draped over its shoulders. As Izuku stared, frozen in a terror that was deeper than any he had felt at the USJ, the figure's head lifted slowly. 2 points of light ignited in the darkness of the helmet's visor. Not eyes. Embers. The color of dying stars. So, a voice echoed, not through the air, but directly inside Izuku's mind. It was the voice from the infirmary, the voice in his thoughts, but now it possessed a resonant, chilling power. It was a voice accustomed to commanding legions and shaping the fates of nations. The little mouse has found its way into the dragon's lair. I was wondering how long it would take you to seek answers you are not prepared for. The figure on the throne stirred, the sound of shifting metal plates the only noise in the crushing silence. He rose, and Izuku was struck by his sheer presence. He was tall, broad-shouldered, a walking fortress of iron and will. He descended the steps, each footfall a silent, final judgment. You seek the ghosts? The armored figure stated, not a question but a fact. He stopped a dozen feet from Izuku, towering over him. You wish to commune with the chain of memories shackled to that borrowed light you carry. What are you? Izuku stammered, his mental voice trembling. The figure reached up and, with a hiss of pneumatics, removed his helmet. It was the face from the reflection. Angular, severe, timeless. The iron-gray eyes, devoid of any warmth, scanned him with a look of profound disappointment. This was not a monster. This was not a demon. This was a king. A conqueror. A being so far beyond Izuku's comprehension of power that it felt like standing before a geological formation that had just started to speak. I have had many names spoken in reverence and in curses, the man said, his voice calm, patient, as if explaining a simple concept to a child. The tyrant of the Ashen Age. The lord of the unsetting sun, the Iron King. But the name that endured, the name that is my truth, is Malachar. He paused, letting the name settle into Izuku's soul like a shard of ice. And as for what I am you. Or rather, you are the faintest echo of me. A shadow cast across a gulf of forgotten centuries. You, Izuku Midoriya, are my reincarnation. The word hit Izuku with the force of a physical blow. Reincarnation. It wasn't a possession. It wasn't a second quirk. It was his own soul. His own, but ancient, stained, and utterly alien. No, that's impossible, Izuku whispered. Is it? Malachor tilted his head, a gesture of mild curiosity. You live in an age of miracles and call the oldest truth of the soul impossible. Your world is built on the foundation of genetic anomalies you call quirks. My power is no such thing. It is not of the flesh. It is the power of the will, made manifest. The power of a true king. He raised a gauntlet hand, and the shadows in the vast hall deepened, coalescing around his palm into a writhing sphere of pure void. Before your ancestors crawled from their caves, men of will could command the firmament. We were not born with power, we seized it. My power is called umbral dominion. It is control over the fabric of what is not seen. Shadow. Fear. The very essence of life itself. The sphere of darkness pulsed, and Izuku felt a terrifying, draining sensation, as if his own energy was being siphoned away to feed it. One for all is a crude instrument, Malachor continued, his tone dismissive as he clenched his fist and the shadow vanished. A bludgeon of brute force, passed from one dying vessel to another, a parasite that promises strength but only brings a quicker death. My power is eternal. It is the art of control. He began to circle Izuku slowly, his steps silent, his gaze never leaving him. I was a king in an age of fire and blood, a world drowning in chaos, where petty warlords and rogue magi tore civilization apart for scraps of land and fleeting glory. I brought order. I forged an empire from the ashes of their failures, an empire of absolute peace and stability. By conquering them, Izuku shot back, a spark of his own spirit finally igniting through the fear. By killing them, Malachor stopped, a flicker of something, not surprise, but perhaps mild interest, in his iron eyes. Yes. I ended countless wars by winning them. I brought generations of peace to millions by eliminating the few who propagated chaos. My methods were harsh because the times were harsh. I did what was necessary. I did not offer them hope, that fleeting, flimsy emotion you and your heroes peddle. I gave them something far more valuable, certainty. Security. An end to fear. You ruled through fear, Izuku accused. Fear is a tool, Malachor replied without missing a beat. It is the most rational of all emotions. It is a respect for consequence. My people did not fear me. They feared the chaos I held at bay. A parent who disciplines a child to keep it from a fire is not a tyrant. They are a guardian. He gestured to the vast, empty hall. This world you inhabit is no different from my own. It is simply better at hiding its rot. You have heroes and villains, two sides of the same worthless coin, playing a child's game of cops and robbers that solves nothing. They fight over and over, destroying your cities, breeding more resentment, more chaos. Your symbol of peace defeats a great evil, and in his wake, 100 lesser evils are allowed to fester. Your society is a poison orchard, and your heroes are merely gardeners, pruning the dead branches while the roots themselves decay. They treat the symptoms, never the disease. Every word was a carefully aimed dart, striking at the very foundation of Izuku's beliefs. He had no answer. He had seen it himself. The rise in crime after All Might's decline, the way Stain's ideology had resonated with a disillusioned public. You see it, do you not? Malachor said, sensing Izuku's doubt. In the eyes of your explosive friend. In the broken soul of the fire and ice boy. This world is fractured. And you break your bones for it. You shatter your vessel trying to wield a power that is not yours, to uphold a system that is failing. You sacrifice yourself to save people who will one day fear and resent the very power you used to protect them. He was standing before Izuku now, the embers in his soulscape's eyes seeming to burn brighter. He placed a heavy, gauntlet hand on Izuku's shoulder. The touch was impossibly cold, a drain that seemed to leach the strength from Izuku's very essence. I am offering you an alternative, Malachor said, his voice dropping to a low, hypnotic murmur. This power you feel, the shadows that answer your instinct, the cold logic that guides your hand, that is your birthright. It is the true power of your soul. Umbral dominion. One for all is a foreign body, a sickness. An infestation of ghosts that whispers of sacrifice and martyrdom. He leaned closer, his iron-gray eyes boring into Izuku's. Cast them aside. Purge the parasitic light. Let me guide you. Let me teach you to wield the power that is truly yours. Together, we can do more than just prune the branches. We can uproot the whole damned orchard and plant a garden where order, true order, can finally grow. We can finish what I started. We can bring peace. The offer hung in the silent, cold air. It was a temptation of unimaginable scale. The power to fix everything. The power to bring about a perfect world, safe and secure. The power to be a king. All he had to do was let go of All Might's dream. Let go of One for All. Let go of being a hero. Izuku looked into the ancient, weary eyes of the tyrant who was, impossibly, himself. He saw the logic. He saw the brutal, undeniable truth in some of his words. The world was flawed. Heroes weren't perfect, but he also saw the cost. A world without choice. A world without hope. A peace bought with the currency of absolute fear. He saw the throne room, cold and lifeless. He saw the shadow creatures and the faceless legions. He remembered the feeling of draining the life from those rebel magi in his dream. It was not peace. It was emptiness. He thought of All Might's smile, bloody and triumphant. He thought of Uraraka fighting for her family. He thought of Ida's devotion to his brother. He thought of Todoroki's scream of defiance as his flames erupted for the first time. Their world was messy, chaotic, and painful. But it was alive. It was vibrant. It was worth fighting for, not conquering. Izuku's trembling stopped. A resolve, forged in the fires of the sports festival and tempered by his unwavering adoration for the ideal of heroism, settled in his heart. He looked up, meeting Malakar's gaze without flinching. No, the word was quiet, but it echoed in the vast throne room with the force of a thunderclap. Malakar's expression did not change, but Izuku felt a wave of cold disappointment wash over him. I will not be a king, Izuku said, his voice growing stronger, clearer. And I won't rule the world through fear. A world like that isn't saved. It's a prison. Your order is just a prettier cage. He clenched his fists, the phantom warmth of One for All, a defiant spark in the overwhelming darkness, returning to him. I will be a hero. I'll save people with a smile, just like All Might. I will use this power, the power he entrusted to me, and I will save people your way, and my way. I will not let you take that from me. I will not let you take me. For a long moment, Malakar was silent, studying him. The pressure of his gaze was immense, a physical weight that threatened to crush Izuku's newfound resolve. Izuku expected anger, rage, a torrent of power that would obliterate his consciousness. Instead, a low sound rumbled in Malakar's chest. It was a dry, mirthless chuckle that held no humor, only an ancient, weary certainty. Brave words, Malakar said, the sound of his laughter echoing in Izuku's mind. The idealism of youth. It is a flame that burns brightly, and just as quickly turns to ash. He removed his hand from Izuku's shoulder and turned, walking back towards his obsidian throne. You cling to your borrowed light and your childish dreams. So be it. I have waited for centuries. I can wait a little longer. He ascended the steps and seated himself once more, the armored king upon his throne of shadow, looking every bit the master of his domain. But hear this, little hero. Malakar's voice boomed, imbued with the finality of prophecy. Your world of hope and smiles will betray you. The people you vow to protect will see your power and call you a monster. Your friends will turn from you in fear. The villains will see you as a threat to be eliminated, and the heroes will see you as a weapon to be caged. They will corner you. They will hurt you. They will present you with choices where every option leads to ruin. The embers in his visor fixed on Izuku, a promise of cold damnation. And when that day comes, when your spirit is broken and your precious ideals lie shattered at your feet, you will be faced with a single, simple truth. The only way to save a world that is determined to destroy itself is to take control. The world will force your hand, child. His final words resonated with an absolute, unshakable conviction. It always does. The world dissolved. The throne room, the black pillars, the obsidian throne, and the ancient king, it all shattered back into static. Izuku was flung out of the abyss, his consciousness slamming back into his body with a painful gasp. He was on his bedroom floor, shivering uncontrollably, the All Might posters on his wall looking down at him like silent, disappointed judges. The cold of the throne room still clung to him, a chilling miasma that his own warmth could not dispel. He had his answer. He knew what he was fighting. But his victory felt terrifyingly fragile. Malakur's laughter still echoed in the corners of his mind, not the laugh of a defeated foe, but of a patient predator, absolutely certain of its eventual triumph. The confrontation in the throne room of his soul left Izuku Midoriya irrevocably changed. The enemy now had a face, a name, and a chillingly coherent philosophy. Malakur was no longer a phantom whisper. He was a silent, brooding passenger, a king in exile biding his time on a throne of shadows in the back of Izuku's mind. The silence was in some ways worse than the condescending commentary. It was the patient silence of a predator, and it stretched Izuku's nerves to the breaking point. He threw himself into his training with a new, frantic desperation. He had to get stronger. He had to master one for all, not just to become a hero, but to build a fortress of light so impenetrable that Malakur's darkness could never breach its walls. He requested a meeting with a new mentor All Might had arranged for him, Gran Torino. The hope was that the seasoned, eccentric hero could beat a more intuitive control of the quirk into him. The problem was, One for All had begun to feel foreign. Before, channeling the power had felt like opening a floodgate to a reservoir of immense energy. Now, it felt like a battle. The moment he tried to draw on Oafei, he could feel another, colder power stirring in response. Umbral Dominion, Malakur's ancient birthright, regarded One for All as an intruder. It wasn't a conscious act of sabotage from Malakur. It was a fundamental, instinctual rejection, like an immune system attacking an organ transplant. His first day of training with Gran Torino was a disaster. The tiny, jet-propelled hero ricocheted around the room, a yellow blur of barely contained chaos, while Izuku struggled to even activate full cowling. "What's the matter with you, boy?" Gran Torino barked, landing a solid kick to Izuku's back that sent him sprawling. "Tashinori told me you were a prodigy, but all I see is a kid flailing around. You're thinking too hard. Feel the power. Let it flow." Izuku gritted his teeth, pushing himself up from the dented floor. "I'm trying." He closed his eyes, reaching for the familiar warmth of Oafei. He found it, a flickering ember. He tried to coax it, to spread it through his limbs, but as he did, a chilling coldness pushed back, a conflicting energy that felt like swallowing ice. The two powers met in his spiritual bloodstream and fought. A wave of nausea rolled over him, and a sharp, splitting pain lanced through his skull, right behind his eyes. "Parasite," Malakur's voice hissed in his mind, the first direct thought in days, sharp and venomous. "It poisons you. Cast it out." "Shut up!" Izuku gasped aloud. Gran Torino zipped to a halt in front of him, his oversized boots scraping the floor. "Shut up? Who are you talking to? Me? And no! Sorry! Just psyching myself up!" Izuku stammered, his head throbbing. He tried again, this time pushing through the pain. He managed to activate full cowling, the green lightning crackling to life around him. But it was unstable. The energy sputtered and surged unpredictably. One moment he had 5%, the next it would spike to a bone-straining 12% for a split second, then drop to nothing. He tried to leap, to emulate Gran Torino's movements, but a sudden power fluctuation sent him careening into a wall instead of up it. Worse still, the conflict was beginning to manifest physically. Tiny, uncontrolled flickers of shadow would coalesce and dissipate at the edges of his vision. When he was particularly strained, a thin wisp of black smoke, smelling faintly of ozone and cold stone, would curl from his fingertips before vanishing. Gran Torino, for all his eccentricities, was terrifyingly perceptive. He watched Izuku's struggles, his brow furrowed. He saw the flicker of shadow, the pained grimace that had nothing to do with physical exertion. He recognized the signs of a power at war with its wielder. "There's something else, isn't there, boy?" the old hero said one evening, after a particularly grueling and unproductive session. "Another power. It feels wrong. Like a shadow clinging to Tashinori's light." Izuku froze, his blood running cold. He couldn't confess. He couldn't betray All Might's trust. I don't know what you mean, he mumbled, refusing to meet the old man's eyes. Gran Torino sighed, a long, weary sound. Whatever it is, it's tearing you apart. You can't control one power when you're fighting a war on two fronts. Figure it out, kid. Or you'll break for good. The migraines became a daily occurrence. They were blinding, skull-splitting affairs that would leave him dizzy and nauseous. During one of these episodes, desperate for relief, he retreated into his own mind, hoping to find a quiet corner. He didn't try to meditate or seek out the vestiges. He just wanted to escape the pain, but in the depths of his own consciousness, there was no escape. He found himself not in the throne room, but in a gray, misty void. And he was not alone. Figures began to resolve out of the mist. There were 7 of them, their forms ethereal and indistinct, glowing with a soft, internal light. The vestiges. He had finally reached them, a woman with long, dark hair that floated as if underwater drifted forward. Her expression was kind, but her eyes were filled with a deep, sorrowful concern. It was Nana Shimura, the 7th user. Child, her voice echoed, not in words, but in pure emotional intent, a wave of compassion and worry. What is this shadow you have brought into our home? Before Izuku could respond, a tall, gaunt man with wild white hair stepped forward, his form crackling with a barely contained energy. He was the first user, the brother of all for one. His presence felt raw, ancient, and fiercely protective. He pointed a spectral finger at Izuku, and the feeling was not one of welcome, but of accusation. A cancer. The first user's thoughts boomed, radiating anger and distrust. You have allowed a rot to take root in the heart of our legacy. It clings to the core, a dark, hungry thing. It does not belong here. The other vestiges murmured their agreement, their collective anxiety a psychic pressure that made Izuku's head spin. They perceived Malika's presence not as a part of him, but as a hostile entity, a foreign invader that had latched onto One for All when it was passed to him. It is an old power. A man with a scarred face and goggles, the second user, Izuku guessed, projected. His thoughts were sharp, tactical, and cold. Pre-quirk. Dangerous. Its nature is antithetical to ours. Light cannot dwell with absolute darkness. One will inevitably consume the other. You must fight it, Nana Shimura urged, her voice gentle but firm. You must purge it. If this dark power is allowed to fester, it could corrupt One for All. Twist it. It could even devour it entirely, leaving nothing but an empty shell. The implications of her words were terrifying. One for All, the sacred torch passed down for generations, could be extinguished. The legacy he was meant to carry could be destroyed from the inside out, by his own soul. We cannot help you while it is here, the first user declared, his form radiating a final, grim authority. Its presence is a poison. It isolates you from us. You are on your own. 9th. Prove you are worthy of the power you carry. Cast out this shadow, or be consumed by it. The vision faded, the vestiges receding back into the mist, leaving him with their dire warning and a profound sense of abandonment. He was alone. The heroes of the past saw him as tainted, a compromised vessel. The hero of the present, All Might, he could not bring himself to burden. And the ancient king in his head was simply waiting for him to fail. The final selection for their internships arrived. Izuku, the winner of the sports festival, had received thousands of offers. But he chose Gran Torino. He had to. He had to find a way to make One for All his own, to make it strong enough to fight back. The internship was brutal. Gran Torino's training methods were relentless. But slowly, something began to shift. The old hero's advice to stop seeing OFA as a special move and to treat it like a part of his body, like the energy in a taiyaki, began to click. By visualizing the power as a constant, low-level current, he found a way to circumvent the violent, head-on collision between the two energies. It wasn't a perfect solution. Maintaining full cowling still gave him a low-grade headache and a constant, chilling sensation, as if he were standing in a perpetual draft. But it was stable. He could move, fight, and think. It was during this internship that the true test came. Hostess City was under attack. While on patrol with Gran Torino, they witnessed the chaos firsthand, nomas rampaging through the streets, heroes struggling to contain the destruction. Then, Izuku received the text from Ida, a pinpoint location. A cry for help that wasn't a cry at all. It was a declaration of vengeance. Ida was going after the hero killer, Stain. Izuku made a choice. He left Gran Torino to handle the Nomu and raced towards the coordinates, his heart a cold knot of dread. He found them in a grimy, blood-soaked alleyway. The hero native was down, bleeding against the wall. Ida was on the ground, his armor pierced, a sword pinning his arm to the asphalt, and over him stood Stain, his tattered red scarf like a shroud, his tongue flicking out to lick the blood from his blade. False heroes, pretenders, you must all be purged. Stain rasped, raising his sword for a final, killing blow. Izuku didn't hesitate. 5% full cowling. He shot down the alley, a green blur, and slammed a fist into Stain's face. The attack sent the hero killer flying, but it was far from a decisive blow. The fight that followed was a desperate, terrifying struggle. Stain was on another level. His speed, his skill, his unpredictable movements, Izuku was completely outmatched. He landed a few hits, but Stain was a whirlwind of blades, nicking him, cutting him, trying to ingest his blood to activate his quirk. You have the eyes of a true hero. Stain hissed as they clashed, his words unsettlingly sincere. Like All Might. But you are weak. Untrained. Your ideals are a flimsy shield against a harsh world. Malachar, who had been dormant, stirred at the killer's words. A flicker of something that felt disturbingly like approval resonated through Izuku's mind. He speaks the truth, in his own brutish way. This society of fakes deserves to be purged. He is a crude instrument, but his goal is not without merit. He's a murderer! Izuku grunted, dodging a thrown knife that embedded itself in the brick wall by his head. He is a zealot, Malachar corrected. There is a difference. He kills for a cause, not for pleasure. A cause I find familiar. Todoroki's arrival evened the odds, but only slightly. His fire and ice provided cover and range, but Stain was a phantom, weaving between their attacks, his skill undeniable. He managed to paralyze Todoroki after grazing his cheek, and soon, Izuku was paralyzed as well. Only Ida, driven by a surge of adrenaline and shame, managed to break free and land a blow. But it wasn't enough. Stain was a monster of conviction. He recovered, disabled Ida once more, and stood over the three fallen students, his posture radiating a weary but absolute victory. He raised his katana high, its edge gleaming in the firelight from the burning city. He was going to execute Ida. Time seemed to slow down. Izuku lay on the ground, his body refusing to obey, watching his friend's life about to be extinguished. One for All was a useless, dormant engine. His heroic ideals were a pathetic joke. He was going to fail. He was going to watch his friend die. Panic. Despair. A primal, screaming need to act. And in that moment of absolute desperation, Malachar spoke. His voice was not a whisper. It was a calm, clear, and reasonable offer made in the heart of a maelstrom. This is the moment I spoke of, child. The moment your ideals fail you. The moment the world presents you with a choice, and every option you possess leads to death. But there is another way. A better way. The throne room flashed in Izuku's mind's eye. The ancient king, sitting impassively, his iron-gray eyes holding no malice, only cold, hard logic. Your borrowed light has failed. Your body is weak. But your birthright is strong. It answers to will, not to flesh. Let me guide your hand. I will not kill him. But I will end this. I will save your friend. All you have to do is let go. Let go. Surrender control. Allow this ancient, ruthless entity to wear his body like a suit of armor. It was a horrifying thought. It was a deal with the devil. A devil that lived inside him. He looked at Ida's terrified, tear-streaked face. He looked at the descending blade of the hero killer. He had no other choice. Okay, he thought, a single word of desperate, terrified consent. The world went white. For a few crucial seconds, Izuku Midoriya was gone. The change was instantaneous and absolute. One moment, a terrified boy was lying paralyzed on the ground. The next, the eyes of that boy snapped open, and they were not his own. The wide, emerald green was gone, replaced by a flat, cold iron gray. The fear vanished, supplanted by an ancient, weary calm. The paralysis from Stain's quirk, a biological anomaly that affected the nervous system, was simply ignored. It was an inconvenience of the flesh, and the will now in command was far stronger than mere flesh. Malachar, wearing Izuku's body, rose to his feet. Not with a surge of power, but with a smooth, economical movement that was utterly devoid of wasted motion. Stain, his sword halfway through its downward arc, froze. He felt it before he saw it. A sudden, drastic shift in the atmosphere. The temperature in the alley seemed to plummet. A pressure, heavy and suffocating, descended upon them all. It was the predatory aura of a true apex predator, a feeling Stain had only ever felt once before, in the presence of All Might. But this was different. All Might's pressure was that of a roaring lion, a force of nature. This was the silent, chilling pressure of a deep-sea abyss, ancient and absolute. What? Stain breathed, his instincts screaming at him. The boy, Midoriya, looked at him. The expression on his face was one of mild, analytical disinterest, like a physician observing a curious disease. Your technique is impressive, Malachar said, his voice Izuku's, but stripped of all warmth and emotion, flat and clinical. But you rely on the element of surprise and your opponent's hesitation. You have never faced a true killer. He took a step forward. The shadows in the alley, which had been ordinary patches of darkness, seemed to deepen, to writhe, to gain substance. They clung to Malachar Izuku's form like a living cloak. Stain reacted on instinct, lunging forward with a speed that should have been impossible to track, his katana aimed for the boy's heart. Malachar didn't dodge. He simply raised his left hand palm open. From the shadow cast by his own arm, a solidified tendril of pure blackness, thicker and more solid than the one from the sparring match, erupted and met the sword. There was no clang of metal on metal. The shadow caught the blade, wrapping around it like a python. A chilling hiss filled the air as the shadow seemed to drain the very integrity of the steel, which began to glow with a faint, sickly purple light as its molecular structure was undone. Stain's eyes widened in horror as his prized katana began to crumble into metallic dust in his hand. In that moment of shock, Malachar moved. He flowed forward, not with the explosive speed of One for All, but with a liquid grace that was both beautiful and terrifying. He didn't punch. He struck. His right hand, fingers held stiffly, jabbed forward. Two solidified, razor-sharp talons of shadow extended from his index and middle fingers, not to pierce, but to strike specific points. One talon struck the nerve cluster in Stain's shoulder, deactivating his sword arm. The second struck a pressure point on his neck. Stain's world dissolved into a blaze of white-hot pain and sudden, overwhelming vertigo. His body locked up, his vision swam, and he collapsed to his knees, gasping. Malachar stood over him, his expression unchanged. Order is not built on chaos and murder, he said, his voice a low, chilling whisper that was for Stain alone. It is built on control. You are an agent of chaos. An element to be purged. He raised his hand again. The shadows in the alley converged, forming into a dozen writhing, semi-solid tendrils. They were not aimed to kill. They were aimed to cripple. To dismantle. To break the man, body and soul. Todoroki, still paralyzed on the ground, could only watch in mute horror. This wasn't Midoriya. The boy who broke his bones to save others, the boy who screamed about being a hero. He was gone. This being was cold, efficient, and utterly terrifying. Its power felt ancient wrong. It felt like the power of a true villain. But just as the shadow tendrils were about to strike, a flicker of green lightning, faint and defiant, sparked across the boy's skin. Stop! Izuku's own consciousness screamed from the depths of the prison in his own mind. He fought back, not with strength, but with his very essence, his unwavering, idiotic heroism. He pushed against the cold, iron will that had seized him. You promised you wouldn't kill him. Malachar paused, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. The vessel was fighting back. The sheer, stubborn force of the boy's heroic spirit was a surprisingly resilient thing. He had underestimated its hold on the flesh. I am not killing him, Malachor sent back into their shared mindscape. I am neutralizing him. Permanently. This isn't neutralizing. This is torture. This isn't what heroes do. The internal struggle lasted only a second, but it was enough. Malachor's absolute control wavered. The solidified shadows flickered. It was in that moment that Gran Torino, having finished with the Nomu, arrived, a yellow blur of motion that slammed into Stain, knocking the already disoriented villain unconscious. The external threat was gone. The internal pact was broken. With a shuddering gasp, Izuku's consciousness slammed back into the driver's seat. The iron gray faded from his eyes, replaced by his own wide, terrified green. The immense, chilling pressure in the alley vanished, leaving a vacuum in its wake. The shadows receded, becoming simple patches of darkness once more. He looked down at his own hands, then at the unconscious form of Stain, then at the horrified faces of Ida and Todoroki. He had no memory of the last 30 seconds, only a phantom sensation of cold power and the chilling echo of Malachor's intent. But he knew. He knew what he had done. He had surrendered. He had let the monster out. A strange, tingling numbness spread up his left arm. He looked down. Faint, dark markings, like black lightning frozen under his skin, were spreading from his fingertips to his elbow. They looked like Lichtenberg figures, the patterns left by a massive electrical discharge, but they were made of pure, unadulterated shadow. A physical stain left by a tainted soul, a permanent mark of Malachor's influence. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder. Heroes were coming. But Izuku could only stare at his arm, at the dark brand that had just been seared into his flesh and his soul. He had saved his friend. But he was terrifyingly aware that he may have just damned himself. The city of Hosu was burning. Columns of black smoke clawed at the night sky, painting the undersides of the clouds a hellish orange. The distant sounds of battle, explosions, crumbling buildings, the monstrous roars of the Nomu, were a chaotic symphony that served as the backdrop for the intimate, brutal ballet in the blood-slicked alley. For Izuku Midoriya, the wider chaos of the city had faded to a dull, roaring static. His world had shrunk to the narrow confines of this grimy brick canyon, to the glint of moonlight on a katana, and the terrified, shame-filled eyes of his friend, Tenya Ida. Ida, and Todoroki were losing. It was a stark, simple, and undeniable fact. The hero-killer, Stain, was not just a villain. He was a force of ideology, a whirlwind of blades and conviction that they, as students, were utterly unprepared for. Every feint, every parry, every desperate lunge was met with an answer so swift and lethally precise it felt rehearsed. Izuku's body was a tapestry of shallow cuts. His hero costume was shredded, and a steady, warm trickle of blood ran from a gash on his forehead into his left eye, blurring his vision with a crimson haze. Stain's quirk, Bloodcurdle, was a terrifyingly effective weapon. He had already paralyzed Todoroki and the pro-hero native. Izuku and Ida were still mobile only through sheer luck and Stain's apparent desire to lecture them into oblivion before finishing them. "You have the heart of a true hero," Stain hissed, his raspy voice cutting through the clang of Ida's armor deflecting a blow. He was focused on Ida now, whose movements were fueled by a reckless, vengeful fury. "But you, child of Ingenium, you are a fake. You hunt not for justice, but for revenge. Your eyes are clouded by personal hatred. You are the cancer I must excise from our society. Shut up!" Ida roared, his leg engines flaring as he launched a reciprocal burst kick. It was a powerful, telegraphed move. Stain, with the fluid grace of a matador, sidestepped the attack, letting Ida's momentum carry him past. As Ida stumbled, Stain's foot shot out, hooking his ankle and sending him crashing to the grimy pavement. Before Ida could recover, Stain was on him, a knee planted firmly on his back, the tip of a serrated knife pressed against the back of his neck. "It is this selfishness that weakens the word hero," Stain continued, his voice low and menacing. "You are unworthy of the name your brother carried with such honor." Watching from a few feet away, Izuku's blood ran cold. This was it. The critical moment. He activated One for All, full cowling, the green lightning crackling around him, but he hesitated. A 5% smash wouldn't be enough to dislodge Stain without risking Ida's life. A stronger punch would be too slow, too predictable. Stain would see it coming and slit Ida's throat before the blow ever landed. It was in this split second of terrified inaction that Malaker's voice surfaced, not as a whisper, but as a cold, clear stream of tactical analysis in his mind. His monologue is a weapon. He uses it to instill fear and create openings. He is a predator playing with his food. But it is also a flaw. His focus is singular. While he is on the ingenium boy, his flank is exposed. The thought was clinical, detached, and brutally correct. Fighting the instinctive revulsion, Izuku moved. He didn't charge head-on. He pushed off the alley wall, using the rebound to change his vector, coming at Stain from the side. He channeled 7% into his fist, a risk, but a necessary one, and aimed not for Stain's head, but for the juncture of his neck and shoulder, a disabling blow. Stain's senses were preternatural. He reacted without even looking, twisting his body and bringing up his katana in a defensive block. Izuku's fist slammed into the flat of the blade. The impact sent a jarring shockwave up his arm, numbing his fingers, but it achieved its purpose. Stain was knocked off balance, his knife slipping away from Ida's neck. Impressive! Stain grunted, landing on his feet a few feet away, a flicker of genuine respect in his wild eyes. You adapt. You learn. But you are still just a child playing at war. He licked a drop of Ida's blood from the flat of his blade. Immediately Ida, who had been scrambling to his feet, froze, his body locked in place by the quirk. He collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. One more down, Stain said calmly. Now it was just Izuku. Todoroki, Ida, and Native were all paralyzed, an audience of helpless statues to his impending failure. The fight was a blur. Izuku used every bit of his training, every ounce of his analytical ability, supercharged by Malaker's cold logic. He dodged, weaved, and countered, pushing full calling to its absolute limit. But Stain was relentless. He was a creature of pure combat, and Izuku was just a boy. A thrown knife grazed Izuku's calf, drawing blood. Stain dove for it, his impossibly long tongue flicking out. Izuku kicked him away, but it was too late. He'd gotten a taste. The paralysis was instantaneous. It felt like his entire nervous system had been flash frozen. His muscles locked, his momentum ceased, and he toppled forward, crashing onto the cold, wet ground, his cheek pressed against the rough asphalt. He could see, he could hear, he could think, but he could not move a single muscle. He had failed. Stain stood over him, his breathing slightly ragged but his posture victorious. He slowly walked over to Ida, who was staring up at him, tears of rage and terror streaming down his face. No, Stain said, his voice devoid of its earlier lecturing tone, replaced now with a grim finality. Where were we? Ah, yes! The purging of a fake. He raised his katana, the moonlight catching the blood on its edge. It was going to happen. Right in front of him. Ida was going to die because he wasn't strong enough, wasn't smart enough, wasn't enough. Panic, hotter and more absolute than any he had ever known, flooded Izuku's being. His mind screamed, a silent, primal shriek of desperation. Move! 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 Somebody! Anybody! Help! One for all, the great power of heroes, lay dormant and useless within his petrified limbs. It was a cannon on a ship that had already sunk, and in that abyss of total despair, Malaker made his offer. The world of the alley faded away, replaced by the crushing silence of the obsidian throne room. Izuku's conscious self was there, a frantic, powerless ghost, kneeling before the great throne. Malaker sat upon it, not in his armor, but in the severe, dark robes of a king, his iron-gray eyes regarding Izuku with a look that was not unkind, but was utterly devoid of pity. It was the look of a master observing the predictable failure of an apprentice. This is the moment I spoke of, child, Malaker's voice echoed in the vast emptiness, calm and resonant. The moment your ideals crumble into dust against the unyielding wall of reality. Your heroism has led to this. Your friends paralyzed. Your enemy, triumphant. Your borrowed power, a cage of your own making. You have lost. No! Izuku's mental voice was a pathetic whimper. Yes, Malaker stated, the word an irrefutable fact. You have lost. But we have not. Your body is paralyzed. Your quirk is useless. But my power, our power, is not of the flesh. Umbral dominion answers to the will alone. And my will is absolute. He leaned forward, the embers of his gaze seeming to pierce through Izuku's soul. The offer was laid bare, simple and terrible. I feel your desperation. Your terror. Your desire to save the boy. It is a powerful motivator. Raw, unrefined, but potent. Give it to me. Surrender the vessel. Let me guide your hand. I will not kill the zealot. I will not grant him a martyr's death. But I will end this. I will save your friend, and I will show you what true power, wielded without hesitation, can accomplish. The terms were clear. Total surrender. Let the monster out of the cage. He would be a passenger in his own body, a helpless observer to the actions of an ancient, ruthless conqueror. Everything he believed in, every ideal All Might had instilled in him, screamed against it. It was a betrayal of everything he was. But then, the throne room flickered, and he was back in the alley for a split second, a single, horrifying tableau. He saw Stain's blade beginning its descent. He saw the final, terrified acceptance in Ida's eyes. He couldn't watch his friend die. He would do anything. Pay any price. All you have to do is let go. Izuku Midoriya closed his spiritual eyes. The fight was over. He had lost. He surrendered. Okay. A silent, soul-shattering consent. And with it, the chains broke. In the alley, nothing seemed to happen for a heartbeat. The boy named Izuku Midoriya still lay paralyzed on the ground. Then, his eyes opened. And they were not the eyes of Izuku Midoriya. The wide, emotional emerald green was gone, swallowed by a flat, cold, and ancient iron gray. The terror in them was replaced by a chilling, absolute calm. The paralysis from Stain's quirk, a biological agent that hijacked the body's neural pathways, was met by a will forged in an age of blood and sorcery. The flesh was weak, but the will was sovereign. With a barely audible groan of protesting muscle, the body on the ground began to move. Stain, his sword a foot from Ida's chest, froze mid-swing. His highly honed senses, which had kept him alive against dozens of pro-heroes, screamed a single, primal warning: danger. He spun around, his eyes widening. The boy Midoriya was rising. Not with the explosive energy of his quirk, but with a slow, deliberate grace that was infinitely more terrifying. He pushed himself to his feet, his limbs moving with a smooth, unnatural fluidity, as if the concept of muscle resistance didn't apply to him. The blood dripping into his eye didn't seem to bother him. The cuts and bruises on his body were ignored. He stood tall, and the entire atmosphere of the alleyway shifted. The air grew cold, heavy. A palpable pressure, like the depths of the ocean, pressed in from all sides. It was an aura of pure, undiluted authority. Todoroki, still paralyzed, felt his breath hitch. It was an oppressive feeling, a soul-crushing dread that made the fear Stain induced feel like a child's prank. It was the feeling of a sheep suddenly realizing it was locked in a cage with a sleeping dragon that had just woken up. You, the boy said. His voice was the same, but the cadence, the tone, was utterly alien. It was stripped of all youthful inflection, all emotion, leaving only a monotone, analytical coldness. Hero killer Stain. Quirk bloodcurdle. An effective paralysis agent. Your combat prowess is adequate. Stain took an involuntary step back, his knuckles white on the hilt of his katana. This was not the same boy he had been fighting. The panic, the heroic fire, the desperate resolve, it was all gone, replaced by a void. What trick is this? Stain snarled, trying to regain the offensive. Another aspect of your quirk? The boy tilted his head, a gesture of mild curiosity. Quirk? No. This is not a parlor trick of the flesh. This is an inheritance. He took a step forward. The shadows in the alley, cast by the buildings, the dumpsters, the very bodies of the fallen heroes, seemed to react to his presence. They deepened, stretching and twisting like living things, drawn to him as if he were a gravitational center. You speak of purging fakes and strengthening society. Nalakurzuka continued, his voice a low, chilling whisper that carried with unholy clarity in the sudden silence. A noble goal, built on a flawed premise. You cannot build a new world with a knife and a mad ideology. Order is not born from chaos. It is forged in fire, built with iron, and maintained by an unassailable will. Stain, unnerved but never a coward, reacted. He lunged, a blistering series of slashes and stabs aimed at every vital point, a storm of steel designed to overwhelm and dismember. Malachar didn't use one for all. He didn't need to. He moved with a liquid, predatory grace. He didn't dodge the attacks, he flowed around them, his body twisted and swayed, his hands moving not to block, but to gently redirect the force of each blow. He was a rock in a river, allowing the current of Stain's fury to part around him, his movements economical, precise, and utterly contemptuous of the threat. It was the skill of a master who had fought 1,000 deadlier battles. Stain's frustration mounted. It was like fighting a ghost. His blades never connected. With a roar, he committed to a powerful, two-handed downward slash, aiming to cleave the boy in two. This time, Malachar did not redirect. He met the attack. He raised his left hand, palm outward. The deep shadow cast by his own arm coalesced, hardening into a tangible, semi-solid vambrace of pure darkness. Stain's katana slammed into it. There was no clang of impact. There was only a sickening, wet thump, like steel hitting dense, cold clay. The blade, a masterwork of folded steel, stopped dead. Stain's eyes widened in disbelief as he felt the impact shudder up his arms. The shadow vambrace held, and tendrils of darkness began to creep up his blade, which began to glow with a faint, corrosive purple light. Crude, Malachar observed, his gray eyes emotionless. Steel! So fragile! With a flick of his wrist, the shadow vambrace pulsed. Stain's katana, its molecular integrity compromised by the touch of umbral dominion, shattered into 1,000 pieces, the shards falling to the ground like black sand. Stain stared at the hilt in his hand, his mind unable to process what had just happened. In that moment of shocked stillness, Malachar struck. His movements were a blur of cold, surgical precision. A chop with the blade of his hand to Stain's wrist sent the broken hilt flying. An open palm strike to the chest didn't feel like a punch. It felt like a wave of pure cold and kinetic force that staggered the hero killer, stealing the air from his lungs. Shadows erupted from the ground, no longer formless, but shaped by Malachar's will. They were not tendrils. They were chains, forged of solidified void, and they wrapped around Stain's ankles, locking him in place. Stain struggled, but the chains held him fast. He looked up and saw the boy standing before him, his hand raised. 2 fingers on his right hand, the index and middle, were now sheathed in elongated, razor-sharp talons of solidified shadow, tapering to vicious points. "I will not kill you," Malachar stated, his voice a final judgment. "Death would make you a martyr. Your cause would live on. No. Your punishment must be more instructive." He jabbed forward. The shadow talons did not aim for the heart or throat. They struck with inhuman precision. One pierced the complex network of tendons and ligaments in Stain's right shoulder. The other slid into his left knee joint. The strikes were clean, deep, and designed not to kill, but to permanently cripple. Stain let out a choked, agonized cry as the cold of the shadows flooded his nerves, a pain worse than any blade. His sword arm went limp. His leg buckled, held up only by the shadow chains. He was disarmed, dismantled. "You are a symbol," Malachar continued, his voice utterly devoid of malice or pleasure. It was the voice of a judge passing sentence. "And you will now serve as a new kind of symbol. A symbol of what happens to those who believe they can reshape the world through anarchy and bloodshed. You will be a monument to failure." He stood over the broken, kneeling form of the hero killer, the shadows of the alley swirling around him like a royal cloak. He had not just defeated Stain, he had deconstructed him, body and spirit, with a terrifying, cold efficiency. It was then that the first, faint spark of green lightning flickered across Malachar Izuku's skin. Deep within the fortress of his own mind, the true Izuku Midoriya, who had been a horrified spectator to the brutal display, began to fight back. He had agreed to let Malachar save Ida, but this was not salvation. This was a violation. It was cold, cruel, and everything a hero was not meant to be. "Stop!" Izuku's consciousness screamed, a desperate, defiant roar against the iron will that held him prisoner. You promised! You saved him, now stop! This is wrong! Malachar paused, a flicker of genuine annoyance crossing his placid features. The vessel was proving to be more troublesome than anticipated. The boy's ingrained, almost pathological empathy was a powerful force, a light that refused to be extinguished. This is necessary, Malachar sent back into their shared mindscape. He is a rabid dog. He must be put down. No! This isn't putting him down, it's torture. We're heroes. We don't do this. Izuku pushed with all his might, the warmth of one for all a defiant ember against the freezing void of umbral dominion. The internal conflict was a psychic war waged in a microsecond. The shadow constructs around Stain flickered. The cold pressure in the alley wavered. It was the opening Gran Torino needed. A yellow and white blur slammed into the alley, a living cannonball that struck Stain with the force of a freight train. The hero killer, already broken and disoriented, was knocked unconscious instantly. The external threat was gone. The internal pact, the desperate bargain, was over. With a violent, full-body shudder, Izuku's consciousness slammed back into control. The iron-gray eyes vanished, his own terrified, wide green eyes returning as if surfacing from a deep dive. He gasped, falling to his knees, his body suddenly remembering the pain of his injuries and the sheer, soul-deep exhaustion of the fight. The oppressive atmosphere in the alley vanished. The shadows receded, becoming inert and harmless once more. He looked at the unconscious form of Stain, at Gran Torino standing over him, and at the horrified, disbelieving expressions on the faces of Todoroki and Ida, who were just beginning to feel the effects of the paralysis wear off. He remembered everything. The cold logic. The brutal efficiency. The chilling satisfaction of dismantling an enemy. He had been a passenger, but he had felt it all. A searing, tingling pain spread up his left arm, a fire that felt like ice. He tore off the tattered remains of his gauntlet. There, etched into his skin from his fingertips to his elbow, were intricate, branching patterns of blackness. They looked like Lichtenberg figures, the delicate, fern-like scars left by a lightning strike, but they were not scars. They were ink black, and they seemed to subtly shift and writhe under his skin, a permanent, physical mark of the darkness he had unleashed. The stain of Hosu was now, quite literally, upon him. He had won. He had saved his friends, but as he stared at the tainted legacy now written on his own flesh, he felt a terror colder and more profound than any blade the hero killer could have ever wielded. He had opened the door, and he was no longer sure he could ever close it again.